Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens. This is Jake along with Scott, and today we're going to hang out with our neighbors in the great state of West Virginia. And we are joined by John Little, founder of Smooth Ambler, as well as Travis Hammond, Smooth Ambler's current head distiller. So, John, Travis, thanks for joining this episode of the Bourbon Lens.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Of course. It's always great to talk to our neighbors. You know, a lot of people don't know how great West Virginia actually is. So I'm going to ask one trivia question, and it's not really a trivia question, one opinion question. Someone who doesn't know something about West Virginia, what would be the first thing you would do outside of two things? Outside of skiing and whitewater rafting, what would you do in West Virginia?
Hiking for sure. The most recent national park is the New River Gorge, and there's a trail there, the Endless Wall, and I went hiking, I guess it was about a month ago, with my 1-year-old son on my back, and the views that you get are just outstanding. Something that you really can't get anywhere else in Appalachia.
Now, that is right up my alley. I can't ski, whitewater rafting. I'm sure I could be okay, but I can walk. I can do that, and hiking sounds fun.
Just don't walk too close to the edge.
Right. Oh, it's treacherous.
Yeah. Well,
You got it right, because that's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
treacherous.
There's so much great hiking here, and the New River Gorge is some of the best.
Yeah.
And then fourth is go to Smooth Ambler, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Should have plugged that first.
Oh, you know, that would have been a shameless plug, but I figured you were going to be, you know, true people of the state and give us something to do other than, you know, a shameless marketing plug.
Yeah, about 3 or 4 years after we started, somebody walked in here and they took a tour, and I don't know if they thought we were going to be a bunch of folks sitting in the corner smoking a corncob pipe, running a moonshine still or what, but they said, you guys are like the best kept secret in West Virginia. And we thought, we're doing everything in our power to be the worst kept secret in West Virginia.
Yeah. Well, and you know, that's one thing that's really interesting, because you all are situated in a rich area of history for distilling, right? You're between Virginia and Kentucky. And here you sit kind of in the middle of those two states that have all this tradition. You know, what's West Virginia's story around whiskey making? You know, we've heard the Virginia story. Obviously, we know the Kentuckian story. What's the West Virginian background in whiskey making, or is there one?
I don't think there's a very rich history in West Virginia of making whiskey that we would think of as, is kind of what we think of today. I think there's a very rich history of people of West Virginia. You know, we like to say that West Virginia is it's a unique place, because people either didn't stay in the fertile lands of Virginia or they didn't go to the fertile lands of Kentucky. So what made people stay here in West Virginia? And these people, we have a history of a little bit of rebellion and a little bit of, everybody stay out of our business. The state motto is mountaineers are always free. And so there's a lot of that. So I think the people that live here have a sort of that nature, that rebellious nature, that kind of do what we want to do nature. And I think it led to, as what we always think of as the moonshine business, right? The moonshine history. But let's not forget that Kentucky and Virginia and West Virginia all sit on the same piece of limestone. And at one point in time, they were basically one state, right? Yeah. So I think that history probably gets a little more muddy the more and more we look into it. But certainly there's not a huge rich tradition of making bourbon here in West Virginia. That's one of the things that we really set out to do, was to not only make a difference in our community and make some change, but really to add value here, and to not be another, let's go make some moonshine and talk about feuding families. We wanted to make a world-class product here, and for people of West Virginia and the region to be super proud of what we were doing.
Yeah.
And for anyone who's spending any time in the state, it's hard to get around here. You might say, okay, I'm 5 miles from you, but that might be a 20-minute drive. So when farmers were growing their crops, growing corn, the easiest way to transport that and to retain any sort of value after harvesting it is to mash, ferment, and distill it, and then put it on the back of a wagon and then head to town. So that's really stuck around, and you hear people talking about moonshine, and it's still something that probably goes on in the state for better or worse. But as far as bourbon goes, I think to John's point, there's not a whole lot of legacy or a whole lot of tradition for bourbon in West Virginia.
Yeah. So, John, with that being said, why? Right? It seems like an easy transition question, but why bourbon? Why West Virginia? Why now?
Well, when we started, it wasn't solely about bourbon. When our distillery, we were in a very different time. We were in a very different time in 2008 than we are now.
Yep.
Whether it's related to craft distilling or whether it's related to American whiskey. There was a small craft distilling movement. I guess it was actually pretty large craft distilling movement in 2009 to 2012 or 13, right? A lot of distilleries were starting, but it was a very different business exercise, right? There were places that were opening up that we like to think of now, we call them mom and pops. And so that was really our goal. My father-in-law saw an article in Time magazine that talked about the growth of the micro distilling business. And really that spoke to what we at the time, we were trying to find a business that we thought could add value to West Virginia, that we could showcase what we loved about our area here. Really wonderful people, clean water and air, a great place to live, and to provide opportunity here that otherwise wouldn't be available. That's really what was the principle behind any business, not necessarily Smooth Ambler. And when we started, we were making vodka and gin and making a little bit of whiskey when we could, predominantly bourbon. And really the bourbon the whiskey part of our business really exploded really because the industry was changing at the time and because of the story of Old Scout. But our business was really not about, making bourbon like you see so many folks today. It was really a different thing. And certainly the business that we had, starting with, I think we started with about $1.6 million. I probably wouldn't start a distillery now with less than $15 or $20 million. I think we're just in a massively different time now.
Yeah. And so with that being said, so you've gone through different iterations, right? 2008, we go through a crisis. Obviously you've gone through COVID. What's that piece of navigating the different landscapes that you've gone through, like the housing bubble booming or bursting, COVID, all of that? What's been the big thing for you all to kind of help stay the course in this micro lane of distilling, but also have some acclaim and growth in those years as well?
I think that's a great question. And I think to answer that fully takes a really long time, I think. One thing that's really been, I hate this cliche, but one thing that's really been consistent is change. We came into this business as a mom and pop distillery. We had a 650 liter still. It's just tiny. And we had another pot still, and then we had a column. And now we ran 24/7 for a while. We don't quite run 24/7 now, but so we've seen this growth in our production. We've seen the massive change in the demand for American whiskey. We've been through the changes with, selling the majority interest in our business in 2017 to a very big company in Pernod Ricard. We've seen all of the changes that have happened related to kind of how social media is evolved and the causes that are being driven on that, and COVID, and then the market's going up and down. It's really been a roller coaster for us, and especially over the last maybe 5 years. It seems like we can never find, whatever it is, steady path, steady growth. It always seems like it's this giant roller coaster. But what keeps it consistent for us? Since day one, we have always been about focusing on making a quality product and about being good people when we do it. One of the things that we like to joke about was that, our marketing story was that we didn't have any marketing story. We tried to be good. By the way, I'm not sure that's a great marketing plan. I think that's a pretty terrible marketing plan, but that was really what we were doing. And we wanted to be good, honest people. We wanted to create unique products Something that wasn't, we're going to do it just like Kentucky. You can't do it just like Kentucky, right? Let Kentucky do it just like Kentucky. So I think that was really our goal. We wanted to make unique products. We wanted to be focused on quality all the time. We wanted to be really, really good people. And, I like to think that mission really has been consistent from day one. Have we made some mistakes? I think about them more often than I think about our successes. But we've made a lot of mistakes, but I think ultimately that's what we've done right.
Yeah. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. And Travis, like, what's been that for you, like from a production standpoint, right? Like, obviously there's business pressures and other things that, John's dealt with, but from a production side, like, have you all had those ebbs and flows and that constant change from a production side as well?
Absolutely. So I got here in 2017 and we were in the process of going back to 24/7 distillation, right? So immediately walked in, there was a plant, our plant was being expanded, went to 24/7 distillation. COVID came around and we had to pull back, right? So there was probably a month and a half where it was just me and Jill Brown and a few other people making hand sanitizer and distributing it to first responders, schools, churches, neighbors, you name it. That was a really interesting time. And then we fired everything back up once we realized that this is something that we're going to have to live with long term. And then, of course, changes within the structure of Smooth Ambler regarding Pernod's purchase of us. But the whole time, for me, what I go back to is the passion for good whiskey. Going and making whiskey better today than you did yesterday. Because if you're not improving every single day, then what are you even doing? I mean, you might as well hang it up and go do something else. If you're not passionate about it, and I'm very passionate about making good whiskey, then this really isn't the business for you.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things I hear from both of you all is the passion behind it, right? The idea of not having a marketing campaign, John, I think is a little funny, but it truly is like being good people, is a good thing. My friend has a saying similar. It's like good people should make more good people, right? Like good people should make more good whiskey, right? Because then people can lean into that conversation and into that story. Because the idea, and Scott and I talk about this often, and Scott, I'll let you chime in here, is the idea is not for me to hoard this. Like if you have a stellar pick or whatever, it's not for us to hoard it. It's to open it up and have this conversation. And like, if good people are making good whiskey, then you're encouraging us to have the good conversation on the back end over a dram.
I think that's pretty spot on.
Yep.
And so as we dive into this, Scott, I don't know about you. I don't know. I've seen you pour a few things over there. I want to dive into the contradiction.
Mixing it up.
Yeah. Mixing it up over here. What have you poured so far?
Admittedly, I didn't know much about these bottles until you handed them to me, and they've got a little writing on them. So I had to go back and research a little bit, make sure I knew what I was drinking. But I did pour both of the contradictions. So we've got the contradiction bourbon and the contradiction rye.
Yeah.
So
I would start with
do a comparison of those.
Yeah.
What's that?
Sorry, I would start with contradiction bourbon. That's kind of the way I think of it as the four you all have. I would do contradiction bourbon, contradiction rye, and then I would do the Founder's Cask Strength Series bourbon, and then the Founder's Cask Strength Series rye. That's how I would drink those four.
Yeah, well, I messed all that up, so that's fine. It's okay. I have tasting notes mentally in my head. But let's talk about what contradiction is, right? Because it's a really interesting bottle with an elephant balancing on a ball. And it's always caught my eye. My dad's won it in like a silent auction, and I was like, "What is this?" And it sat there, and I ended up drinking the bottle. Like honestly, it was a bourbon, and it was good. It's just session bourbon, and enjoyed it. So talk to us a little bit about what contradiction bourbon and contradiction rye is, just from a overall concept perspective.
Yeah. So when we started making whiskey, we were making vodka and gin. We were making a little bit of whiskey. And then in 2011, we started sourcing. And I don't think you all have any of that tonight, which is the Old Scout, right? We started bottling product that we didn't make. And by the way, it was really unique to tell people that we were doing that and being very honest about it, right? And that's where the name Old Scout came from. So we had the product that we make. then we had the product that we sourced, which was Old Scout. And in 2000, I don't even know what year it was now, 13 or 14, I actually tasted a product, one of my favorite products that I've ever tasted. It's a Parker Heritage Master Distiller's blend of mash bills. And it's a 13 and 7, what I understand anyway, is a 13 and 17-year-old whiskeys. And it is a blend of wheated bourbon and bourbon made with rye. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It's still one of my favorite bottles of whiskey that I've ever had. And I loved it so much that I thought the idea was really fascinating that I wanted to see if we could do that. And so we took some 9-year-old low rye bourbon from Indiana that we were sourcing under the Old Scout program. And at the time, we only had 2-year-old wheated bourbon. So it must have been like 2013, probably 2013, 2014. And we made a bunch of different blends of that whiskey. And maybe about 3 or 4 months, settled on 3, sent those 3 different samples to some friends of ours in the business, some friends of ours that we just met in the business, and then some to a woman named Nancy Fraley. They call her Nancy the Nose, and she's a sensory analysis person.
Just somebody named Nancy Fraley.
Never
heard of her. Who's this Nancy lady?
Yeah, do y'all know Nancy, I guess?
Yeah, we just got to meet her in person a couple weeks ago, but Nancy's awesome.
She's awesome.
Yeah.
And so we sent that, and everybody basically picked the same sample. And we made a few changes to that blend. And that's ultimately what we started off with Contradiction. So Contradiction was not a like, oh, let's see how we can spread our own distillate. Let's see how we can dilute our distillate or dilute MGP. People give us way too much credit to think that there's anything either devious or smart about it. It was really just an experiment. Right. It was something that we wanted to create some really cool whiskey. And that's the name became, we knew the name immediately, right? John Foster, who used to be our sales and marketing guy, director of sales and marketing, is now with Ragged Branch, a little distillery in Virginia. He came up with that name in really about 10 minutes. It was 30 minutes, maybe. It was really easy for us to think of things that we make, things that we don't make, whiskey from West Virginia, whiskey from Indiana. And that's really where the name Contradiction came from. The elephant is how the elephant came is kind of a different story. But, that whiskey was a blend of 2-year-old and 9-year-old whiskey. And so that really became part of what we do. So, whiskey we make, whiskey we don't, the blend of those 2 different things. And it really allowed us to make a whiskey that we thought was really easy to drink, really easily accessible. At the time, it used to be 100 proof, I think, and now it's 92 proof. Some people didn't like it. They thought they could taste the 2-year-old whiskey. They're probably right. It was an experiment. It wasn't meant to. A lot of the products that we have, they weren't started as like, oh, we're going to have this product line and it's going to do great things and we're going to have multiple line extensions off of it. We just created something that we thought was cool. We just tried to do interesting things, and that's how Contradiction came. So it's really, that's the basis of it. And I will say this, Contradiction has evolved so much since we started. So maybe 10 years we've been doing Contradiction now, and it's a blend of whatever 4 and 5-year-old whiskey all the way up to about 12-year-old whiskey right now, as opposed to 2 and 9. And the whiskey is so much better today than it was when we first started. And that's because, one, we're better at what we do. We're better at making whiskey. We're better at blending whiskey. The whiskeys are older, right? So if you've got a 2-year-old whiskey and a 4 or 5-year-old whiskey, they're not just 2 years older, it's twice the age, right? It's significantly improved. A 5-year-old whiskey is a 4 or 5-year-old whiskey as opposed to, I don't know, is there any 4 in there, Travis, or is it mostly 5?
No, it's 5 and up.
5 and up. So it's all 5 and up now. So the whiskey's older. We're better at blending. I just think the whiskey is massively evolved. And really it speaks to Travis's point earlier, which is, our goal has never to be really consistent. Our goal has been to be consistently great. And we want to improve every day. So I come in, Travis samples, somebody else does it too, but Travis samples every single batch of every product that leaves this distillery without fail. Even if he's not here, before it leaves the distillery, he samples it when he comes back, and then it's allowed to be shipped. So he's the final call on everything because he's got an exceptional palate. Sorry, I'm really rambling here. But it's gotten so much better And he says it. He's like, "Oh man, it's amazing how much better these batches are today, even when I came here, or 3 years ago, or 5 years ago, right?" And because we're consistently working on trying to be great. So he tells me, "This is the best batch yet. This is the best batch yet." He might be.
No, I'm never lying on that. It's always the best batch. It's always
perfect. I thought you were just full of shit.
No, well, I am.
Yeah.
My favorite.
There's a little bit of that.
Just a little bit.
It's such a utility player. It can make a good old fashioned. It can make a Manhattan. You can drink it on the rocks. You can drink it neat. I like it in ginger ale. Because it has rye bourbon and wheated bourbon. The rye gives you spice. The wheat gives you mouthfeel and viscosity. And what you wind up when you're blending these things together is a finished product that's greater than the sum of its parts. And for me, Contradiction is not that I'm having a pour every day, but it is my go-to whiskey at the end of the day.
Scott, what was your first impression knowing it's a rye in a wheat mash bill?
I mean, it's traditional, like sweet and spicy, right? You get the corn sweetness up front, and then it does linger with a little bit of that spice note. But I mean, to me, the cornbread note is like, it's like cornbread, banana bread. Like it's like real doughy, bready.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was the one thing.
No, I'm talking about the bourbon. Bourbon. I've not dove into the rye yet.
No, we're talking bourbon. No, that was the thing that I noticed like right off the bat. Like you get the wheat. The wheat is a sweet, like pooling grain. Like I get that. And then as you drink it, that's when the rye shines, right? Like you get that citrus and you get the rye spice on the back end, like allspice, nutmeg, all that kind of stuff. Your spice rack shines. And it blends really well together to get more of that banana breadish flavor profile. It's not the like banana you would think from Tennessee whiskey, but there's some like esters of banana that shows up, which is not a bad thing. It just gives it a full flavor. And this drink's super easy. Like that's the other thing is, not to use a faux pas in bourbon, in podcasting to say smooth, but it is a very simple, easy drinking whiskey. I think sometimes we all are like, how many tasting notes can I get? Can I get, grandma's shoe on a Wednesday afternoon? No, I don't get that, but I do get an enjoyable whiskey like that. I can pick out a few notes, and that's what's pleasant about it.
Yeah, at 92 proof, it's approachable. It's the lowest proof that we offer. Nothing we do is chill filtered, so that means that we have to stay above 92 proof, or the fatty acid and glycerols would come out of solution. You wind up with flock in the bottle. So it's really the entry level bourbon to the Smooth Ambler collection. Contradiction is really the everyday drinker. Hey, I've never tried Smooth Ambler. What should I try first? We always direct them to Contradiction, specifically the bourbon.
We've got a friend, a guy named Mike Jasinski, he's been on the cover of Whiskey Advocate. He's a legendary whiskey enthusiast who's been basically finding, these hidden gem bottles, these older bottles, these pre-prohibition bottles, special bottles for 15, 17 years, longer than most people certainly even knew it was a thing. And he told me about a year ago that Contradiction was one of 4 bottles that he kept on his shelf at home. And he thought it was the best example of the entry into bourbon. And I don't know if I've maybe been honored with a comment like that 3 or 4 times in my career. And certainly a very, very meaningful thing to think that somebody who's tasted all of this delicious whiskey over the years, one of the 4 bottles he keeps on his shelf there, that when everybody comes in who's new to whiskey, that's one of the first things they drink.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's a really solid pour, and I really like not to harp on the bourbon, but the rye whiskey from the Contradiction rye, like brings it up a level, like a lot of notes, a lot of flavor. And I think it hits that traditional rye drinker right where they want to be hit, full of flavor, citrus, fruity. Like I think that Contradiction rye gives people a lot of what they want there. I don't know, Scott, if you've been able to knock it back or not, but it's tasty.
I mean, it's candy candied sweetness, candied fruits.
100% candy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like those candied oranges. Like if I get that note on a whiskey, doesn't matter. Like traveling with my dad, we'd pick up the orange slices for 99 cents. Sometimes they'd be a little harder than you wanted, but you'd eat the hell out
Now
of them.
about $6.
Yeah. Yeah, true. It's inflation. Inflation's hurt the 99-cent candy at the gas station. But like that note just brings back so much like warmth in my body of like time with my dad. And it's like, now I've transported that glass of whiskey into a memory that's where I want to be. Like I want to live in those warm, fuzzy moments. And that's kind of what that rye whiskey made me think of.
Well, not to get too sentimental, but I think that's one of the amazing things about whiskey, right? You mentioned it earlier. It's supposed to be enjoyed. It's supposed to create, you're supposed to drink this stuff with great friends and great family, or great friends who become family. And it's supposed to be about bringing people together. A good friend of ours says that whiskey is just the vessel that brings us together. And I think it's one of the great lines I love in this business. And so it's about creating memories like that. So you taste something, you think about some memory you might have had with your father or friends or family. I think that's exactly what it's meant to do. And oh, by the way, orange slices are amazing. That's my go-to candy.
Damn, that's awesome.
Yeah,
my go-to candy right there.
So what's the story on the mash bill of this one? Since we've got the bourbon, which is the wheated and the rye bourbon mash bills, what's the story on the contradiction of the ryes?
So this is a blend of 4 rye recipes. So it's a blend of 51% rye, a 70% rye, a 95% rye, and an 88% rye. 88% rye we make in house. 95 is from Indiana, and then the other 2 rye recipes are from Tennessee. And it has a large percentage of we don't really share the breakdowns anymore. It's a good story about that, actually, but we don't share the breakdowns of those any longer. But it's got a large percentage of this is the 51% rye, and so you got a lot of corn in that mash bill, and I think that's really where a lot of the sweetness is coming from. You get some of these ryes that are, as we all know, probably the most popular one obviously is the 95.5 from MGP, and it's bold and in your face, and we make something really cool like that as well. But it's certainly a little sweeter than most ryes. It's also a little bit higher proof. It's 105 proof. And so, it's substantially more in your face than the 92 proof Contradiction bourbon. We wanted them to be the same. I wanted them to be the same because it's nice to have both of the proofs really similar to explain why the price is the same. But quite honestly, Travis and the folks in production said it's best at 105 proof. We actually printed so we argued about it. I gave in to the 99 proof. We printed labels for our first big run. And then Travis came and said, sorry, it's still better at 105 proof. So we threw those labels away and printed labels again at 105 proof. So, that's something that we're constantly checking ourselves on, right? Is we want to do what's right for the whiskey. And I wanted to do I wanted to make it easy for salespeople and for marketing people to be able to explain why it was the same price, because it was the same proof, similar age. But ultimately, what we have is 105 proof whiskey, and we did it because it's really what's right for the whiskey.
So you're telling me the COGS on that first batch are a little bit higher because you had to throw away the raw materials.
So, correct.
Yep. That and we're putting it at a higher proof, so you get essentially less bottles per barrel of aged liquid.
Yeah,
and more excise tax.
And more excise. That's a good point. Yeah,
right.
and you're paying, and we're paying more tax on it. But they are line priced together, and I think both the contradictions are great because Contradiction bourbon lets people enter into full-bodied bourbon whiskey in a way that maybe they otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to do, because maybe they're drinking something at 80 proof and they want to step it up and come into Smooth Ambler's house of whiskeys. Then the Contradiction rye is a rye whiskey that functions in a very similar manner. It's super sweet, so it's not as in your face as maybe our Founder's rye. It's not cask strength. It's 105 proof. It needed, in my opinion, it needed to be 100, mine and a bunch of other people at the distillery's opinion. It needed to stay at 105 proof to give it that punch that rye whiskey should have, more so than bourbon. Bourbon's supposed to be, to use your word, smooth, and rye is supposed to be a little more punctual, a little more angular, a little more in your face. And that's why I think those two do the Contradiction brand justice.
But what I love about this rye is it's not that grassy rye that I'm typically not a fan of. So I like the corn element, the sweetness element, the fruit, the pops of fruit that you get. Yeah. I think it's a good blend of rye.
I touched on this. I want to back up just a minute. So, I said we don't share the percentages any longer, and I want to tell you why. So we've always been very open and honest about sourcing whiskey. When we first made the Contradiction bourbon label, we wanted it to be the most transparent label in the business. So it said 73% 9-year-old low rye bourbon from Indiana and 27% wheated bourbon from West Virginia. And about maybe 4 years ago, there was some banter on one of the forums or somewhere that I was looking on to, and somebody said, well, they only make 27% of that Contradiction bourbon. And I thought, the reason you know that is because we told you how much of it was in there. It's not like we were trying to hide it. And so between that and then people getting confused when we used to say, so it's technically 73% of a low rye bourbon, which is 71% corn, 4% malted barley and 25% rye. The percentages got people confused. And so now we just tell people it's a blend of 4 bourbon or 4 ryes rather, or it's a blend of 3 bourbon. So,
you need like an accounting degree just to figure out what's the actual percentages are after it all shakes out.
We try to keep it simple these days.
Yeah. The KISS method, right?
I think the nice thing about Smooth Ambler is you guys aren't hiding the fact of what you've done. On your website, it says procured whiskeys.
Yep.
Like Old Scout, there are some Old Scout bottles out there, and people that have been following bourbon for a while are mythical bottles, like that you guys had out. Like those are mythical bottles, but you've evolved, and the Contradiction is that evolution to, hey, look, we've been distilling. It's good shit. We're going to start making our blends and showing you that we can blend too. And then obviously we're going to get into the next step here. And we can go into that a little bit more about the next step of evolution.
Yeah, I mean, the next step of evolution, Scott, and that's what we like to call a tease in the business. And this segment is called the Founders segment, with the Founders Bourbon and Rye, like as we dive into those, right? So, John, as you all went through the Contradiction process, now you're at the point where probably some of your whiskey has come to an age where you want to put it in bottle, is what I'm assuming, and put it in the Founder series. So talk to us a little bit about what that Founder series is and what whiskey drinkers should expect when purchasing a proofed up bottle of Smooth Ambler.
Well, we have made, again, we've been making whiskey here for really since 2010. And we have worked hard to constantly improve the quality of that whiskey. And we've been, I would say we've been obsessive about it. And, the thing that the heritage distilleries have, look, the whiskey's great. We know that. And it's not a miracle that it's so great. It's a kind of a miracle that they make so much of it and that it's so damn great. But they have a really long runway. And they have a lot of experience and a lot of time that they've used to refine those things. And I think, all of the craft distillers, the young distillers of the world really haven't been able to enjoy that long period of time to improve that. I think now, as you mentioned, Scott, you just mentioned about how many of these mythical bottles that there are of Old Scout. I think now we're really starting to enter the golden age of whiskey for Smooth Ambler. I think we have mature product that we make ourselves. We have maturing sourced whiskey, and the whiskey that Contradiction offers is now that we offer in Contradiction is better. And I think all of those products are getting better. really because of our experience and because the whiskey is just getting older, right? As we all know, that helps whiskey tremendously. We've really made a couple different things here. We predominantly make wheated bourbon. We make what we call a low rye bourbon, but some people have given me grief on because it's 21% rye. We think of that as a low rye bourbon. And then we make a little bit of high rye bourbon that we've never really released. And then we make rye whiskey. The wheated bourbon that we released over the years, we released a thing called Yearling, and then we released a thing called really what we know as Big Level. And neither one of them were very successful. We think maybe the product was too immature, maybe the product was a little too raw, and we worked really, really hard to basically pull those off the market and not re-release those offerings of those, and to really work to refine those. I think the bourbon and the rye now are in really great spots. And I want Travis to tell you about what he did when he first came in here and really how we've changed and improved some things. And I think we're really to that point now where we can start making these offerings in a meaningful way with the bourbon and the rye. And what I would tell you is that last year in the Ultimate Beverage Challenge in New York, there were 3 products, I think, 3 whiskeys that were given a 90, 96 or 97?
I think it was 97.
97 points and nothing any higher. And they were a 32-year-old Scotch, a 36-year-old Scotch, and a 5-year-old rye from West Virginia. So we think we've worked really, really hard to do that, and we have continued to put our foot on the gas pedal and make sure that we're doing that every day. And so for us, you know, we make a lot of whiskey. People think of us as Old Scout or Contradiction, but we've been making a lot of whiskey for a long time, and I think we're now finally coming to mature stock of that whiskey. And I think that the whiskey that we make today is better than the whiskey that we make 3 years ago. And the whiskey we made 3 years ago is better than the whiskey that we made 5 years ago. And so we're tasting 5 and 6 year old whiskey, and the awards that we've won are 5 and 6 year old whiskey. I can't wait to see what we're going to get and what we're going to do and what people are going to think of our product when they taste what we put into the barrel today. So that's my long story of what Founders means. It's really, really important for us to look. We work hard at sourcing great whiskey, and we work hard at blending great whiskey. But let's not fool ourselves or to think anybody here listening to this has a misconception. Both of those things are way easier than making your own whiskey. They are much, much easier than making your own whiskey from grain to glass. And this just, you know, no matter how much credit you give blenders and no matter how much credit we give people for sourcing great whiskey, and we've taken a lot of credit for that over the years, the reality of it is making whiskey from grain to glass is much more difficult. There's just so many variables, and you need so much experience.
So not only that, but you're making grain to glass whiskey, and you also still have to blend it. So all of the issues and all of the hardships that Contradiction has, as far as figuring out, okay, is this barrel approved? Does it pair well with these other barrels? How do you make that blend? We still have to do that with Founders. But that's at the very end of its life. At the beginning of its life, you're thinking about everything. You're thinking about what temperatures are you making your mash at? Have you checked your grain when you're receiving it? What temperature are you fermenting at? What yeast are you using? What pH are you setting at? What proof are you coming off your column? What proof are you coming off your doubler? To John's point, the Big Level that we released, it didn't do very well. That was because it was pot stilled distillate. And in my opinion, column distillate is much, much easier to control and to maintain tight parameters on. And then we got better at inspecting our grain. We changed what yeast strain we were using. Just all of these things that we started looking at and focusing on, hyper focusing on, asking, okay, variable A, does that affect it? Variable B, does that affect it? If you change A, you're also changing B, and finding the interplay between those variables and finding what the optimum configuration of all of those parameters were to make the best whiskey that you can make was really a 2 to 3 year exercise between 2018 and 2019. And the whiskey that we're putting down today is phenomenal. Of course, the whiskey that we were putting down since we got the column in 2015 is really, really good. And that's what's currently going into the Founders line, both the rye bourbon and the rye whiskey.
Yeah, it's all an experiment. And then after the experiment is done, you got to age it for 5 years.
Yeah, and then you got to wait. Yeah. So
and then did our thoughts then Did they pan out?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you go back to the drawing board and see, okay, well, this was good. This was maybe needed some improvements. And then you iterate and you iterate and you iterate. But you can really start tasting if whiskey is going to be good, one, when it comes off the column, but then it goes into the barrel and it starts picking up all of the color, all of the flavors, oxidation reactions are occurring. And at 2 years, you can kind of get a glimpse into what it's going to be. 3 years are a little bit closer. By 4 years, you can really see, is this going to be a success, or maybe we need to go rethink the changes that we made. And if you do that through a course of a career, every 5 years you get a new chance to change something. Maybe you have 5-6 iterations if it's a full career of making whiskey. So it's really, really interesting it's humbling to say, okay, I get 5 shots at doing this, and after that, someone else gets to figure it out. And that's why the legacy distillers have the biggest leg up, is they've had generations and generations to figure that out.
Yeah, they know when they screw up the legendary whiskey that's on the shelf. It's like,
right,
it doesn't taste like it should, and everybody's going to know.
Yeah.
But like, this is a batch product, right? You have got different batches that will come out of the founders. And I think that's where you can lean on your blending experience that you've developed over the past however many years you've been blending yours and everybody else's. I think that's a nice thing.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoy the vintage ability of that, right? Like, so you can show that and showcase your differentiation that you've created in your whiskeys, both the bourbon and the rye. And not to belabor a point, but you told me the bottle of Big Level I have, I should not really care for. Is that what I heard?
Well, no, that's probably what we said. But we've been browbeat for the past 5 years over Big Level that maybe we do err towards that. But Big Level is good. Big Level is not what Founders Wheated Bourbon is going to be when we release it next spring. So expect those two products to be different. I think, again, there were some missteps when we were running our pot still. Pot stills are tough, because you have to make cuts. There's a reason most people are running columns, and I have a lot of respect for people who are running pot stills and running pot stills very well. So I like Big Level. I always liked Big Level, but it really wasn't for the masses. I believe the Founders Wheated Bourbon that's going to be coming out in another 6 months is going to knock people's socks off.
You heard it here first on the Bourbon Lens.
Yeah. Jake, you like that pot still funk though. So.
Oh, I love me some pot still. Don't let it fool you. Give me a little bit of congener, a little bit of all that in there. I like a little bit of that because apple shows up, and apple's a great tasting note. Orange slices, number 1, apple, number 2.
I mean, you're right. It's not mass market appeal. You can't pour somebody a pot still bourbon and say, you need to compare this to your daily drinker.
Your Weller,
you just can't. It's not the same whiskey. It's worlds apart.
I think that's accurate.
Yeah.
And what Travis alluded to earlier was these variables, and about 2018, 2019. Really, what he really did was he really changed one. He and his team changed one variable at a time, and they basically changed 32 variables over the lifetime of this experiment. And then they did both an organoleptic profile off of the whiskey that came out of that, and they ran all of that through a gas chromatograph and got a digital fingerprint on that whiskey. And he spent a long time making those changes and collecting all of that data, both from the organoleptic paneling and from the gas chromatograph. And basically the changes the data that he saw there informed the changes that we now make in the whiskey that we produce. So whether that's yeast strains, set temps, pitch temps, for yeast, distillation proofs off column and doubler, he mentioned those things are really what ultimately changed our whiskey significantly. And that whiskey is really going to hit the market in another
2 or 3 years.
Yeah. 2 years. That's probably right. 2 years. So, we're really excited to see those things, and it's really because Travis has the chops to do that stuff, right? He has a technical background to do that. He has an exceptional palate to be able to notice those things through the organoleptic profiling, and of course the ability to be able to read a gas chromatograph and to make those changes. So it really takes that, right? If you're looking at, again, the way we started this business, right? We were trying to create a mom and pop thing and doing it, learning whatever. We don't get me wrong, we were obsessive about it, but bringing in a chemical engineer and having somebody who's trained to be able to do those things greatly improves the products over, hey, I think I've figured this out because I've read a couple of books about how to do it. And certainly we made a bunch of changes through trial and error, and we did a really good job on making some things, and we did a really great job, obviously, in blending whiskey and sourcing whiskey. But the real changes that we've made to the quality of the whiskey that we make in the Founders line is the additional things that Travis and his team have done over the years.
Yeah. No,
it's a labor of love.
Go ahead. What were you saying, Travis?
It's a labor of love.
Yeah, it definitely is. And when you all are rolling through and creating whiskey, it's a crapshoot, right? Like you got all your money down, you put it on black, you spin that wheel, and it's like 4 years later, see when that wheel lands, right? Like that's what it is. I spent many a night in the West Virginia casino right outside of Huntington. So at the Great Dane racetrack, you watch Great Dane's race. It's wild, wild west in West Virginia, but then you have to go west. It went east actually. But that's one of those things I think that you all can see, and you can roll with the punches and take it as like a growth opportunity. And sometimes people want to pick up their ball and go home. They're like, well, we're never going to do it again. We didn't get the acclaim we needed, like with Big Level or whatever. But you all are really actually, recreating yourself to say, you know what? Here's an opportunity to redo this in a couple years. And kudos to you all, because not many people have the cojones to do that. So, that's big time.
Well, we appreciate that. And that hasn't always been easy for me.
Yeah.
In terms of, somebody tells you your kids are ugly. It's not easy. It's not easy to, when somebody tells you that your life's work is not so great, it's hard, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we've tried to be there for all of it. So it's easy to be there and accept all of the, whatever the right term is, the glory when you're winning awards. It's a separate thing to still have that same social media presence or still be in front of people when somebody says, hey, this doesn't really do it for me. And I think it's been really, really important. We've tried to be there for both of those things and to listen to people. Let me look, if somebody says whatever, if somebody says some crazy adjective for it, it's not helpful. You don't really know what that means, right? And so when somebody says, hey, this doesn't suit my palate, and here are the 3 reasons I don't like it, then you say, all right, so here's, I understand that. Let me think about that. Maybe that's a yeast strain, or maybe that the distillate's too young, or maybe that's as we talked about earlier, maybe that's a pot still. We try to take those and the positive comments and to use those as feedback to make our processes better. To make I don't care whether that's about marketing or making whiskey or how we act in the tasting room when people are here. We use all of that feedback to be better.
Yep.
That's the goal.
No, I think you hit nail on head there, right? So, Scott, I see you sniffing some whiskey. What are your parting shots here as we, kind of wind this down? Because, me and Scott, we keep a line of communication going as we go through these podcasts, and I agree with them. Like your all's openness, your all's conversation has been refreshing. So we really truly appreciate that. So Scott, what do you got? What's your thoughts as you knock back some wee Glencairns of Smooth Ambler?
Yeah. So the Founder's Cask Strength Bourbon, it hits me with like this dark chocolate cherry note, and like it's like the grain notes are gone. Like the contradiction had some graininess. Like I like that, cornbread, corn sweetness. This comes with like dark chocolate covered cherries. I haven't gotten to the rye yet, but
that's something we really, really are.
We're excited about it.
We're proud of all of them, but the rye we think is a truly special product.
Yeah, but the bourbon it brings a nice punch. I mean, it's 122.2, I think, if my math is right.
Yeah,
it's punchy.
Batches, but
we have different batches. What are we drinking, Travis? What proof is this?
Oh, math's hard. This is 122.8.
Yep.
Yeah. But I just love y'all's website because it's like procured whiskeys, mingled whiskeys, homemade whiskeys.
Yep.
Like I texted Jake and he used the word openness. Like the openness of this conversation has been super refreshing because you guys have tracked your evolution as a company, as a distillery, as a whiskey house.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's Old Scout is Old Scout. You know, contradiction. But this Founders is where you guys are heading and where you're going and what's going to be coming out. And I mean, I think at 6-year-old and 120 something plus proof, it's got a lot of flavor here.
Yep.
But I guess we'll switch to the rye because that's what we need to.
So speaking of the rye, I just did a rye combination. I just did Contradiction rye and then I did Founders rye. I just umped it, right away. So a lot of similar notes, but it's just, I actually thought at the higher proof, it was a little more mellow because the sharpness that you get in the peaks and valleys in that rye you talked about earlier, Travis, like it rounds out the sharpness. It gets the full flavor. So there is a little more depth of chocolate and a little bit less like candied orange, but it's there. It kind of weaves together. That's what I thought was really nice about the Founders rye. It was just took the sharp edges away and gave me that full flavor right across my palate.
This rye is funny because you said it earlier, right before we got on the podcast. Travis and I were talking. We were trying a new batch. It was bottled yesterday. Batch 5.
That was Sunday.
Huh? What, Friday? Whatever. Batch 5 of the Founders Cask Strength Series rye. And I think it's the best product that we've ever put in homemade product we've ever put into a bottle. And I said it's like burnt orange and sugar and cardamom. And it, to me, the nose on it is, I want to bathe in it. So it's so good. And it's bold. It's certainly more bold than Contradiction rye. And we made this product with Larry Ebersold's help, and obviously for the folks that don't know, Larry Ebersold, right? I know you all know, but Larry ran MGP for 25 years and really perfected that 95.5 recipe. And he made this with us. And so this is an 88% rye, 12% malted barley, and we use a different cooking style. We do a fusion cooking recipe on this. So we cook at lower temperatures, longer, slower, cooler temperatures.
If you were to read all of the distilling books, this recipe that we use is just on the borderline of not being physically possible because of the temperatures that you have to achieve to hydrolyze your starches and then to convert those into sugars successfully. But Larry, over the course of many, many years, figured out exactly the parameters that he needed to set, all of the knobs that needed to turn to create something that preserves a lot of the flavor compounds of the rye, which carries through fermentation, which carries through distillation, which carries through maturation, which creates a rye whiskey that is really unique to the industry. I've only tried another 1 or 2 rye whiskeys. I think Larry had helped them out too. That taste like the rye that we're making. So I'm super excited about it.
So that's all in the cook process.
That is all in cooking, all in mashing. And like I said, if you were to say this, the mashing process to any of our enzyme suppliers, they would say, well, you're not getting high enough temperatures. Okay, but we're getting starch conversion. We're still getting the yields that we're looking for. And it kind of makes their eyes go cross. They can't compute.
Does not compute.
Vic, does that remind you of a certain distillery in Lexington?
A little bit. There's some guys in Lexington that
playing around with some temperatures
that you should have a chat with if you haven't. And they're about to open up a brand new distillery in Midway, Kentucky. There we go. I just gave you a lot of parameters. You can Google search, but they're doing some really cool stuff. And I'm glad you brought that up because Yeah. Same way. Like it is mom and pop. Like you walk in, you could see everything, for them, like right there and have those conversations. So there's a lot of correlation between the two. So as we look to put a bow on this one for the evening, and more to come, because you teased the Founder's Wheat, and I want to be a part of that. Scott wants to be a part of that. So we'll be talking to you all in about 6 months here, apparently. But with that being said, one last parting shot. Where can people find out more about Smooth Ambler and what's happening at the distillery in West Virginia?
Obviously, you can go to our website. It's one of the great things about our website is, Scott mentioned it a little bit, which is there's a pretty interesting concept there about how we tell the truth about things that we make. It's fascinating, right? That telling the truth would be innovative, but we obviously talk about all of our different products. You can obviously find where to find all of our whiskey. There's a geo search on there, geolocator on there, which is really, really easy to find Smooth Ambler. If you want to know more about kind of what's going on at the distillery, you can follow any of our social media channels at Smooth Ambler on Instagram and Facebook. We keep pretty up to date on some of our releases. Most of those things don't go out via newsletter. They go out via our social media. And we have some things that we're not yet announcing. So you guys have some time to get this podcast launched, and then the folks can follow us on those channels, and then we can update them about the releases in the fall. Some cool finishing experiments that Travis is finishing up, and a few other special releases that we'll have probably in the September through December timeframe.
Very cool.
Well, there you hear it, guys. Make sure you're following Smooth Ambler on all your social channels. Sign up if they have a newsletter. I'm sure there is somewhere along the line you can get a hold of that. And if you're not following our newsletter, it's called The Weekly Pour. Delivers every Friday, thanks to the hard work that all these PR companies give us. So we have something to talk about, and the hard work that Scott puts into editing our podcast. So we highlight that every week. So Scott, thank you as always. But John, Travis, thank you so much for joining this episode of the Bourbon Lens. We truly appreciate it. And to all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in and hanging out with us for the last hour. You can find out more about Bourbon Lens over at Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Bourbon Lens. And if you want to join our growing Patreon community, and I might think that I'm going to send an email right after this episode to the team at Smooth Ambler to see if they would join our Patreon tasting club later on this year to sample some of their great whiskeys that we got to try tonight. And last but not least, do us a favor. Go over to your favorite podcast listening app. If you're not subscribed, hit subscribe now and give us a 5-star review. We would truly appreciate it. And until next time, cheers.
Cheers, gentlemen.